ice cream? Lord have mercy. Because of Ben Cohen, I'm telling you, I'm going to have to work out for 5 months just to work off the ice cream. So we are so delighted to be here at this panel. We just enjoyed a wonderful panel, a discussion about climate change and our commitment to Mother Earth. And we're going to switch from that commitment and add on our commitment to each other and talking about the criminal justice system, as some folks call it, the criminal injustice system. Just depends on what end of that system you are on. I am Nina Turner, just in case folks don't know. And I'm the president of Our Revolution, and we are certainly proud to be a sponsor, one of the sponsors of the Sanders Institute, The Gathering, and I'm so glad that the Sanders Institute has brought this happy family together. I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out and a happy birthday to the one and only Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm.
All right.
Yes, she would have been 94 years old. And I thank her for being unbought and unbossed, and I'm cut from that same cloth. So happy birthday, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm. Yes. So in our criminal injustice forum, we're going to talk about not just what ails the system in America and also in the world to a certain extent, but particularly in America, but also those things that we can do to be the difference, to be the change. It's one thing to lay out the challenges, but every time we lay out a challenge as leaders, and all of us are leaders in this room, we are citizen leaders. We must be ready to lay out what can happen to be the change, and that's what we plan to do. Oh my God, and I have 4 of my closest friends. Not just on this stage, but even in this room. But I have with me the one and only Dr. Cornel West, the intellectual himself. Oh my God. I was reading Race Matters. Many of you may remember that in college. You know, that was my first, anyway. And then, oh my God, what Sister Cynthia Nixon did in New York City, baby. Woo! Or New York State, I should say. Mayor, not just New York City, New York State. She did that daggone thing, and I call her fierce, and I talked to her about being one of the mountain jumpers, and she jumped some mountains in that great state to show and to give people a vision of what is possible. So my sister, actor and activist, Cynthia Nixon. And then Mayor Gus Newport served as mayor in Berkeley. Mayor was from 1978 to 86. Oh my God. And let me tell you something. The mayor and I, Dr. J, we were on the plane together from DC here. And he was just so chipper. Here I am worn out. He took the red eye from California to DC to be here in Vermont. And then I stopped all my complaining. So Mayor Gus Newport. And then what can I say? I am just blessed today because I could go on and on. All of the people on this stage are just badasses in their own right. But my God, Danny Glover, the lethal weapon himself. Hello, somebody. Just really love him, and the fact that him and, you know, for people like me and Dr. West and Mayor Newport, but the fact that Danny Glover, Brother Glover, and Sister Nixon are activists. They are activists. They take their gifts and their talent and their incredible reach to a whole nother level in the real world. And that is certainly a beautiful, beautiful thing. So we are blessed to have this esteemed panel with us this afternoon. Can we give them another clap of praise? So, Sister Nixon, I'm going to start with you. Well, first of all, let me lay out some figures real quick. Because, see, I was told you put some numbers out, you know, so people think, you know, you throw some numbers out. But numbers of people in prison, and we're not just going to talk about the prison industrial complex, but we do have to talk, because the injustices in the system, it's not just about the police or people in law enforcement, they're on the front lines. But it's also who are our judges, who are the prosecutors. All of those people within the cog that make up this system, all of them matter. We focus a lot on law enforcement because on the criminal side, those folks are the first entree into the system on the criminal side. And if it's unfair in the beginning, baby, it's going to be unfair in the end. But implicit and explicit biases, all of us have to talk about those things, so it's very important. And I say that to you as a mama, as a black mama. In case folks don't know, let me just shout it out. And my son is in law enforcement. And my son is a millennial, and so I understand as a black mother in America, the pain and the hurt, knowing that your child, in the words of the urban poet Ice Cube, my skin is my sin. I understand from that perspective what it means to have a black son in America. But on the other side, I know what it is to have a black son in America who wears a badge and a gun and who is taking the oath to protect and serve. When he doesn't have his badge and his gun, he is in danger just by his very existence in this world. And when he does have on his badge and gun, he is still in danger on that side too, so I get it. My son is a second generation law enforcement because my husband is a retired police officer, so I get the pain and the hurt, and that is why, that is not the only reason why, but when this stuff becomes personal to you, to understand why we must reform the injustices within a system that is not fair, she is not blind. Lady Justice is not blind. She see black and brown and poor folks just fine, and they get locked up too often in this country. So here we go, numbers of people in prison. In the United States of America, we have about 322 million people, and we in prison 2.2 million. If we just take China, 1.3 billion people, and they have 1.4 million. The imbalance there of these two great nations, just laying that out. And why is it that we believe that we can lock up our sisters and brothers and just throw away the key and never care about whether or not they really are rehabilitated? So we're going to talk about all these things from the law enforcement side, from the judicial side, from policy side, those things that we can do, those things that we can demand that policymakers do, but also those things that we can do. So Sister Nixon, you were just on the trail in the great state of New York. You had ideas that were visionary even in this arena. What are some of the policies that mattered to you that you were talking about along the campaign trail?
So what you say is so true that, you know, we have runaway mass incarceration in the United States, and as unjust and as color-based as that has always been, something happened 40 years ago with the war on drugs, where arrests of people of color, it's become a surrogate for race-based discrimination, the way Jim Crow has been and the way the black codes were. And so what we have is the prison population has quadrupled in the last 40 years. It's not only, proportionally, it's 4 times the size. And that has to do with the war on drugs and targeting of people from minor drug offenses and largely people of color. And so there are so many things that we need to do, particularly in New York, but across the country. I would say there are 4 main ones, that ending cash bail, ensuring right to speedy trial, ensuring right to discovery, and legalizing marijuana. And if you take legalizing marijuana just as an example, right, this is a black people, white people, every color people use marijuana at the same rates, but 80% of the arrests for marijuana are of black and brown people. So you can see immediately how the prison population has just grown enormously, and that the war on drugs was a race-based targeting, policing, governmental system. But what we also really need to look at and solve are the other 3 things that I mentioned. You know, we had this case in New York. Probably a lot of you have heard of this case. A young black man named Khalif Browder, who was arrested for allegedly stealing a backpack, and he was incarcerated at Rikers for 3 years because he couldn't afford bail, and he wouldn't take a plea bargain. And he was incarcerated for 3 years, and he was in solitary for more than 800 days. And he would not take a plea. I mean, this is a really important thing to understand, that in New York, 98% of the convictions that we see are of people who have taken a plea bargain. Because what we do in New York is we make it so horrible to be in jail. We arrest people, mostly people of color, on minor infractions, and we incarcerate them, and we lock them up, they lose their jobs, their family loses the income, and we make it almost impossible for not to take a plea bargain. What Khalif did is he wouldn't do it, and he was beaten repeatedly by guards and by other inmates, and at the end of the 3 years, they let him out. Finally, they had no case against him, but because of what had happened to him when he was incarcerated, he killed himself after his release. So we see how we have to end cash bail, because on any given day in New York, 25,000 people are sitting in jail because they can't afford bail. We have somebody like Harvey Weinstein, who is accused of many heinous crimes, but he has $1 million to pay, and he's sleeping in his own bed. He's out in an hour. But you have somebody like Khalif, who's incarcerated for a petty thing, and he's in jail. His life is destroyed, and eventually his life is stolen from him. So we have to end cash bail, because what we're effectively doing, 70% of the people are locked up because they can't afford even minor amounts. New Yorkers spend $42 million on bail of amounts of less than $1,000. We're incarcerating people of color, and we're incarcerating poor people, and we need to end this system that is so much economically based, and we have to look behind the for-profit bail bonds. They look like mom-and-pop operations, but we have the big banks behind them. And we have to, America's incarceration rates are runaway, but in New York, if New York was its own country, we would have the 6th largest incarceration rates in the world. Russia incarcerates people less than us. So, and it's really important. It's so much, one of the themes that we've heard again and again this weekend, and I'm sure we'll continue to hear, is it's a matter of what you're spending your money on, right? So we spend $22,000 a year per student in New York, but we spend $70,000 to incarcerate people, right? In New York State, we spend $118,000 to incarcerate people in New York City. And we need to invest in schools, not jails, because that's the thing that's going to make a difference. And when we're incarcerating people of color for minor infractions, particularly youthful people, and we've got Wall Street bankers who are breaking the economy with absolutely no accountability, nothing happens to them, that's when you know our society and our criminal justice system are truly broken.
Thank you so much for that. Agreed. I think it was Brother Frederick Douglass. Yeah, we can clap for that. I think it was Brother Frederick Douglass who said something like, it's better to build strong children than to try to repair broken men.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
And it really is about where our priorities are and our values. So speaking of that, and you said the 6th largest.
Right. If New York State was its own country, yes, we would have the 6th highest incarceration rates in the entire world. And the thing about, if you just look at what, there are really spots of hope where you look at, in terms of so many states are starting to legalize marijuana, just take that issue alone. And you have places like Oakland, California, and you have places like Massachusetts where we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? And we have to make sure that we're doing what Oakland's doing and we're doing what Massachusetts is doing, and we're taking the revenue from that and prioritizing those communities that have been targeted by the war on drugs and make sure they are first in line for licenses and small business loans, and that we're taking the tax money from that and reinvesting it in education and jobs programs and programs to help people re-enter society after they've been incarcerated. And we've got to expunge people's records. There are too many people sitting in jail for decades. People of color, people who look like me, they don't get prosecuted for using marijuana. And you know, we have to have one system of justice for everybody.
Amen to that. So, Brother Glover, talk to us. I know you do many things with your cachet. I won't just say your celebrity, but with the gift that God has given you to be able to reach people and touch people and have those kinds of doors open. People don't really understand how many boards you're on. I mean, you are a Sanders Fellow, by the way. Let me shout that out right away. Right away. But we were talking a little bit about the alliance.
I think one of the privileges I've had is because of my visibility. I've been asked on so many occasions to become engaged in some way. And it's not as if I had not been engaged. I think the first protest I went to when I was about 14 years old was a death penalty protest in California. And those of us who are old enough to remember Carol Chessman, who was finally executed. It's the first protest I did. And that was something I think organically important for me as a 14-year-old kid to be there. But, you know, I come in up in an age where in my community, you know, it begins with the juvenile delinquent centers, and then it matriculates to city prison, and then it goes on to state prisons, you know, and that's the reality of it. You know, all three of my brothers have been formerly incarcerated, all three of them, and yet they were able to, at some point, change their life around. And that isn't to say anything, because essentially, whatever my life was, my parents always ascribed or aspired to some middle-class lifestyle. And so the larger questions that play out within that framework, you know, one of my brothers had been arrested as a juvenile and became 18 years old. He had a choice to do one or two things: go to back to prison, go to jail, or join the army, and consequently ended up in the Tet Offensive in Vietnam at 19 years old, and never was the same after that. You know, and as soon as it's just deceased. But all those things, I think, have drawn me to that, to the issues around the death penalty. I remember Mike Farrell in the case with Gary Graham in Houston, Texas, who was on death row. Mike Farrell called me, one other wonderful actor and activist, called me and asked me to go down to Houston in 1994. And subsequently, all these different interventions that I'm in had been involved in. But I've had an opportunity also to visit prisons, and I'm naming the people who brought me to the table, mainly Harry Belafonte, through Bo Taylor, who we were down in Venezuela together with, through Nani Alejandros, one of the great young leaders around prisoners and their reentry, formerly incarcerated, their reentry back into society, and allowing them to play roles within the community of healing inside the jail, and also once they get out, become productive as community, as citizens as well. But we can't, without this moment, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention what happened in Florida this last election with the reenfranchisement of formerly incarcerated citizens.
That's right.
You know, and an important part of that.
1.4 million
I'm sorry.
1.4 million.
1.4
Yes,
million
second
citizens,
chance.
1.4 million citizens. And organizations like the new organization, the Alliance for Family for Justice, and we posted an article with myself and a brilliant lawyer, Sophia Elijah, who was the lead lawyer for the retrying of the Panther 8 just a few years ago. For those who remember the Panther 8s who were retried, attempt by the Ashcroft administration, the Bush administration, to retry them for murder charges in there. So all these things have brought me to these organizations. The Center for New Leadership in Brooklyn, and Bed-Stuy was just signed an agreement in which they were trying to change the dynamics between young men who were arrested and the precinct in which is a very great idea. How do we change the relationship? How do we create another dynamic in terms of relationship? Which all those things are fascinating ways in which we look at mass incarceration, look at how youth of color are targeted, and how, as you mentioned before, that the situation with bail, the bail project that Mike Novogratz, who has a hedge fund in New York, has been a part of as well. So these are ways in which we can talk about mass incarceration, but we know the origins of mass incarceration. Michelle Alexander, in a brilliant book, in the New Jim Crow, talks about systems of control. She uses the forms of system of control throughout the historical arc of this country, and also Blackman's wonderful book, Slavery by Another Name, which creates, after the Reconstruction begins to talk about and let us understand through all this empirical data about what happened, what actually happened to people's lives in the course of that, and how the system of policing and imprisonment, which had been established at the point through slave catchers and the various other ways in which they maintain a structure of order and a system of order. And all those particular things leads us to this particular point in time. And certainly the question of climate change and global warming, the question of war, the question of health care for all, certainly are an essential part of whatever the intersectionalism that we build around issues. But certainly when we talk about mass incarceration and the impact that it has on communities, et cetera, that should be right there in the midst of that discussion as well. The Alliance for Families for Justice focuses on the relationship that families have with their loved ones who are incarcerated, and certainly the organization had a march just last year, a march from New York City to Albany to focus on the plight of men and women and who were incarcerated, and the families as well as that as well. So those are the kind of things that I think intrigue us in terms of trying to find ways and allocating our resources and also our energy toward those things as well.
And Brother Go, you bring up a very good point about the family, because a lot of times people don't think, you just think about the individual, but you don't think about the impact that incarceration has on the family economically, socially, all of those variables that make up a strong community. And speaking of community, Mayor, my goodness, and we talked, in the green room about the riots that happened in the 1960s, Rochester. I mean, while we're still in New York, we're still staying in New York, Cynthia, in the 1960s, and your experience. I mean, you are still an activist, but as a much younger man, you were in the thick of it, knowing members of the Black Panthers, being navigating the world even with Brother Malcolm X, and also being called upon to talk to the people who actually put together LBJ's Kerner Commission report, which is very relevant today. In that report, they said two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Mayor, can you give us a historic perspective? Because Brother Glover was going there with the historic perspective. Can you tie us up on the historic perspective of where we are now and kind of from your experience, how we got to where we are?
I feel like my whole life has been involved in police mispractices. My grandmother started taking me at the age of 5. We grew up in Rochester, New York, to see Paul Robeson and Marion Anderson. My grandmother only went as far as the 4th grade because in Virginia, she went to school late after picking cotton one day. A white teacher slapped her. She walked out and never went back. But she became an avid reader. They got married real young in those days, so she moved her family, first after my mother was born, to Pittsburgh, where she had cousins, and then on to Rochester. She never told me until I was 26, ahead of the biggest civil rights group in Rochester, New York, after the black Muslim mosque was invaded, that her mother was a slave. And so I feel like the spiritualization she gave me by exposing me to all these things is what keeps me involved. I'm 83 now. My granddaughter suggests I'm 4 years older than baseball, but but as an 11-year-old, I was knocked off of a corner by a policeman just for walking because he felt I was walking too slow or whatever else. So I got involved in movements then.
Wait, Mayor, I don't want to gloss over that. I hope everybody heard what the mayor just said. You were walking down the street.
I was walking down the street.
And you got knocked in the head.
You just not pushed off the sidewalk.
Or
yeah.
pushed you off the sidewalk. Let me not.
Yeah.
Pushed you off the sidewalk because.
Just because I was black and was a gang of young black men. My feeling is, under those circumstances, that incarceration, as we know it in this country, is a continuation of slavery. Because when you think about it, we've got new jails on the stock market. You remember, it's the convicts who make the license plates and all that and gets paid 70 cents an hour and all those kinds of things, et cetera, and whatever else. As I said, I got to know Malcolm X when I was in Rochester and the police invaded the black Muslim mosque. Malcolm called Daisy Bates from Little Rock, Arkansas, who was organizing, said, I'm coming to Rochester, who should I talk to? And she gave him my phone number. Malcolm X called me and talked to me every night for 2 hours. I was just speechless. But he flew into Rochester, New York on a very cold February day, and I'm standing in the airport waiting for him. We'd never seen each other. And I'm surrounded by all these white men in white shirts and felt hats, and Malcolm comes through the door and he said, who is Gus Newport? I said, I am, sir. He said, young blood, you got the best tap telephone in America. This is all FBI here. We went down to the jail and got those brothers out and then went and talked to the sheriff, went to the court, and was able to get them out. The very next day after Malcolm came to Rochester, the New York State Legislature, because he spoke at a settlement house after that, a nonprofit organization, the New York State Legislature passed a law that Malcolm X could not speak in any nonprofit or any government-funded institution in the state of New York. Within 24 hours, they did that. And so then Malcolm came back, and I was actually traveling with him 4 days before he was assassinated. We're doing a film on his life now because the last 3 years, he and Martin Luther King have become very close. Malcolm had moved to the civil rights movement, but history is not truly recorded in the United States of America. So you don't know about that. All you know about he was this violent, hatred-driven, this and that. He had come to nonviolence. We had a meeting at Sidney Poitier's house. A. Philip Randolph was there and some other people. Martin Luther King was on the phone in Florida because he'd been arrested once again for demonstrating. Malcolm had decided after he went on the Hajj and found out he had a white mate when he went on the Hajj in Madagascar, that some blacks, he'd been told by Elijah Muhammad that only blacks could be Muslims, found out that was just hogwash from the Nation of Islam. But he came back and he actually went to see a psychiatrist himself because he'd been preaching a lie. But we were on the phone and it was decided that Malcolm, after meeting with the African heads of states, whatever else, would go before the United Nations to file a suit against American hegemony, imperialism, and colonialism. And Martin Luther King said, brother, I'll be there to second it. And all the heads of African states and whatever was going to do that. Of course, 35 days later, Malcolm was dead. Now we got, what's his name, the head of the FBI? J. Edgar Hoover. They wiretapped that telephone call. we've been able to get some of that information for this film we're doing. We've been able to talk to New York police going back that time. Some of them, white police, have given us information of some because they came to respect Malcolm. And we found out from a psychological standpoint that men over the age of 80 want to vindicate some of the things they did before, so we're getting all this kinds of information. I reorganized the police department when I became the mayor of Berkeley because I had had some experience naturally. And we called in an organization, a POST, P-O-S-T, that trains police. And we found that we had too many administrators for the number of people on the street and this and that, so we put together all that. We hired 12 guys from the Black Panthers, but we checked them out and whatever else because we wanted people who knew how to deal with street people. When Ronald Reagan was governor, he closed the mental health institutions in California. And all those people came to Berkeley and San Francisco and Oakland. And so immediately what we did, we hired mental health workers to work the streets with police. We bought some yellow buses, school buses, put them on our marina so that homeless people could sleep in them, put porta potties there and portable showers. We gave each of them a mailbox so that they could apply for SSI and whatever else. And I used to give them the first 30 minutes on my city council meeting, and they could use my conference room to discuss. You can't plan public policy for somebody without planning it with them. That's the problem with politicians, et cetera, and whatever else. Martin Luther King used to often speak of the beloved community. Love and approach and understanding, common respect is what is going to make the difference. And that's what I'm sure is going to come out of the Sanders Institute. I was mayor at the same time that Bernie Sanders was mayor. And he and Dennis Kucinich and I used to be invited to Eastern universities to talk about public policy because we were looking at alternatives to public policy. Bernie invited me to Burlington when he was running for governor. And we're sitting in Bernie's office, and two reporters, one from the UPI and one from the AP, pulled out this big paper. Bernie said, "What's that?" You know when those big printouts of the big punch holes in them they used to have going back to the old printers? She said, "Well, we could put a public figure's name into the computer, and we got 90 stories on Gus Newport. Bernie, we want to know why you, a Jew from Brooklyn, who's a socialist, invites Gus Newport, a former black nationalist and a socialist, to a state that's 97% white to campaign with you." And Bernie said, "Because we're going to talk about the issues." That's what it's all about. We are here for the people. We know what needs to be happening. We have no business having all these people incarcerated. Yeah. We should be about creating jobs so that we can compete. Because, you know, the stock market fools all of us. It suggests that it's at its highest, but as I go across this country and engage people, I talk about a lot of them. We got more unemployment and poverty ever in the history of this country. And naturally, that's going to cause people to get tripped up and go into jail, et cetera, whatever else. So love is what it's all about. And as Martin Luther King said, we still are aspiring to be the America that was supposed to be.
Come on, Mayor. Talk about that. Talk about it. Yes. Whoa. And what the mayor, what you just laid out, that it matters who we elect. See, it matters who we elect. And if Mayor Newport can do that, then we can have high demands for the folks that want the privilege of serving us in elected office. Mayor, thank you so much for showing us what public policy can do. So Dr. West, the mayor really set it up for you. I don't know if he know that because he talked about the love community.
He got it.
He set it up for you.
Lord, so I'm on the caboose, but I'm on the train.
You're on the train. So, Dr. West, if I might, because the mayor, he really set this up. I don't know if he knew, but he put that layup. He put it up there.
He got us on the love
He got it up there
for
you to go on and do that thing. Right. So I'm gonna quote Jesus, if I might.
Oh Lord.
Come on now.
If I just may. Because I'm coming down your street.
Lord have
around
mercy.
the corner to your house on this
Come on.
So I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was homeless and you gave me a room. I was shivering and you gave me clothes. I was sick and you stopped by to visit me. I was in prison and you came to see about me. Dr. West, the moral and spiritual imperative, whether it's from the Christian tradition or other spiritual traditions and religious traditions. Dr. West, give us a word.
Well, to begin with Jesus and connect it to him being incarcerated on the way to the cross. You've got a Jewish brother, comes out of prophetic Judaism. Judaism was a moral religion in the history of the species because it said to be human is to spread hesed, steadfast love, a loving kindness to the fatherless, the motherless, the stranger, the weak, the vulnerable, anybody who's oppressed, no matter what color, gender, national identity. He was already an internationalist because he was coming out of the Hebrew prophets when Amos said, I'm concerned with justice for everybody. I'm beginning with the particularity of Jews, but it's for everybody. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means, of course, even if you're agnostic, if you're secular, if you're atheistic, if you're Christian, if you're Islamic, if you're Buddhist or you're Hindu, at that deep human level, are you really willing to courageously engage in a quest for truth? And the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak, no matter where it is, no matter what part of town it is. Chocolate sides, vanilla sides, yellow sides, red sides, brown sides, but it's also talked about love.
Yes.
And see, in America, it's almost impossible to talk about love because it's been commodified, commercialized, marketized. It's all sentimentalized. No, love is the most difficult thing, and yet at the same time, the most precious and the most powerful. Why is that? Because you have to have a courage to examine yourself to learn how to die in order to become a new person in love. You need to be able to kill. Now, what we have in America is we have an imperial meltdown. We're living in an American empire. We've got 4,855 military units, 857 around the world, 128 countries, special operations. Pentagon gets 47 cents for every dollar. We got an empire. We got precious democratic practices in the middle of it. That's why when we founded this nation, it was an imperial democracy. Just ask our precious indigenous brothers and sisters. It was a patriarchal democracy. Ask our sisters, who are not a minority, but the majority of humanity. You see? And it was a white supremacist, slavocratic democracy. That's it. That sounds paradoxical. No, it's just contradictory. And all of us shot through with contradictions. That's what it is to be human. So we have to tell the truth. So all Jesus is saying is, right, that to be human at the highest level is to engage in a quest for our truth and unconditional love. The love includes everybody. The truth is going to begin with yourself and your society, your community, and the world. And to spread as much love as you can. And justice being what love looks like in public, just like tenderness being what love feels like in private. And that's very important to keep in mind. Because in our imperial meltdown, we're getting spiritual whiteout or blackout, whatever term you want to choose, which is the eclipse of integrity, honesty, decency, massive corruption, I don't care what color. So when I think of criminality as a Christian, as a revolutionary Christian, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer,
Yes, sir.
I begin at the top. Why are the criminals at the top hardly talked about? All that market manipulation, insider trading, predatory lending, fraudulent activities on Wall Street, how many of them went to jail? Not at all. Not at all. Massive corruption in government. Republicans and Democrats. Republicans are not the only gangsters.
Speak on it.
We got some gangsters in the Democratic Party. I got Marxist gangsters in Brazil. They were corrupt. They were my comrades. I still love them. I'm Christian. I love everybody. But they're wrong as they could be. Because greed is a difficult thing not to be seduced by when you're not accountable. You see, that's true for anybody in any high place. And one of the wonderful things about the politician, what we love about Brother Bernie,
Yes, sir.
we talked about that last night. Bernie's not perfect, but that brother, he has a quest for integrity
Yes, sir.
such that he's less subject to wholesale corruption.
All right.
Sister Jane can testify to that in ways we don't even need to go into right now. That's very important. That's very important. We thank Brother David for this kind of leadership, bringing us together like this. Right. But when we talk about criminality, then we have to put it in the right context. If we had all the prison reform in the world and still had high levels of poverty, still had decrepit school systems, still had inadequate housing, still had dominant images of a corporate media in which you deal with conflict by killing other people, we still have a problem. My beloved is from Canada. Canada has roughly the same population as California. More Californians kill each other with knives than Canadians kill each other with anything. That's a cultural, spiritual issue. The dominant myth of America is the frontier. What was the frontier? Barbarians, civilized, moral regeneration through violence. We kill them, we kill them, we kill them, we kill them. So we have a deeply violent element. And to be black or red or brown in America is to be subject to the raw violence. I can't even talk about that many times. I had to deal with the police, dragged off to jail and so forth. I was the biggest cocaine driver. I'm trying to be a professor at Yale. They dragging me to jail for cocaine. I said, I wish I was that entrepreneurial, so sophisticated and entrepreneurial since I need some money. But I mean, it's just being black in America.
Come on.
The question is not what's coming at you. The question is what you're going to do with it.
There it is.
You see, that's where, when you talk about the prophetic fight back, that's what Sanders Institute is about. But it's got to be solidaristic. You see, right now, we all in our little silos. Black folk in one corner, brown folk want to be in another corner, women in another corner. We got to deal with patriarchy, white supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, trans just as precious as anybody else. But how do we come together in a solidaristic way with strong moral and spiritual foundation?
Amen.
And we're not talking about perfection. All we're saying is, and this is all the black folk has ever asked for America.
Right.
We want to be respected, we want to be treated fairly, and we want accountability of anybody who got power over us. That's what it means to be a Democrat, small d. You see it in Whitman, you see it in Emerson, you see it in Louis Armstrong, you see it in Curtis Mayfield, you see it in Bruce Springsteen. They're Democrats on the ground. They want respect, they want fairness, and they want accountability of anybody above them, you see. And that's what it is with the police department. If the police are killing our young brothers and sisters, are killing you and I, they didn't kill you too, but you'd be a little further behind in the line. We want a fair trial and send them to jail, just like anybody else. How many of these policemen go to jail? Very, very few. Give them a fair trial, send them to jail like anybody else. That's just what it means to call for fairness, respect, and accountability at its deepest level. But when you got 1% of the population, you got 41% of the wealth, and the folk don't have hardly but crumbs to deal with. They're bombarded with violent images, the toxic masculinity that reinforces the male insecurity. And the women trying to deal with all of that viciousness coming at them. Thank God for the Me Too movement. We want accountability for the men who have patriarchal control over us in the workplace and other places, you see. So that legacy that you talk about of that Jesus, and of course Jesus has been appropriated immediately by the Roman Empire, and he's definitely been appropriated by the American Empire. So we won't talk about how vicious the institutional Christianity has been. But there's been some prophetic Christians, just like prophetic Jews, prophetic Buddhists like bell hooks, prophetic Hindus. Hindu got a problem with caste, thank God for Ann Bedker. Yeah. But Gandhi was doing his best. But what enough? And when it comes to our secular brothers and sisters, let me tell y'all something right now. That if, in fact, in this moment in which neoliberal establishments are collapsing, not just here, but around the world, and the only thing presented that has some credibility is a vicious, xenophobic, authoritarian populism on the way to neo-fascism, and if we can't generate a left populism that is credible, that speaks to them as human beings, and if we're no longer able to even sustain the best of the neoliberal had something positive about it, at least it talked about some sense of liberty, but it got so marketized, privatized, financialized, and then militarized. If we don't have a left populist option that's credible, we headed down a neo-fascist road, I'm telling you. And a lot of it has to do with the running out of spiritual gas.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
People say, oh, if this is the way the world is, then it's just a survival of the slickest. Let me get in on the game and try to get over by any means. That's a level of spiritual emptiness that make Martin Luther King
Yes,
Jr.
sir.
cry from the grave. And we refuse to see that go without us fighting. There's no guarantee that we're going to win. So what?
Let's do it, though.
So what?
Let's
We're going
do
to fight
it.
anyway.
Let's do it. All right.
Absolutely.
Wow. Hello. Man, we gonna do this. Woo, look at the sand. Dr. J, look at your fellows go. Bringing the thunder, the lightning, and the rain, baby. We doing it all right now. So speaking of that, oh my God, this is a blessing. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling all kinds of ways right now. I'm ready. So we got to bring this on out to the people, because all of the people, the part of the gathering that is most important is that it was important that we all have a voice in this conversation as we armor ourselves up and study ourselves for this battle. And part of that is the engagement. So we're going to bring this thing on out and have some questions, and we're going to have our STEAM panel answer the questions or be in dialogue with one another, because we all have the answers to the questions. Who are we starting with?
I just want to say, this is a beautiful moment.
Roseanne said this is I call her Rad. Rad said this is a beautiful moment. That's all I want to say. This is a beautiful moment. Thank you, Sister Rad.
Thank you for help facilitating with your leadership.
yes.
National Nurses
The
United.
nurses, yeah.
That's the truth.
All right. Hi, I'm Jennifer Epps Addison. I'm the president and one of the co-executive directors at Center for Popular Democracy. If you Google worst state in America to be black, you'll find the state I grew up in, Wisconsin. We are home to the most incarcerated zip code in the world, 53206. Growing up and knowing this, I decided, hey, I want to be a part of the solution, so I became a public defender. And 3 months into being a public defender, I was told by a judge on the record that if my client didn't have $10 couldn't get $10 from 10 friends to pay his $100 cash bail, then he deserves to sit in jail. So the day after that, I quit, and I decided to go back to organizing, because reform doesn't work in a system set up to exploit and oppress. And so, I am so thankful for things like decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana, for, police accountability boards and all of these different reforms, because they're making something a little bit less bad, but they are not the transformation we need. And I want to ask you a question about the money, because, a lot of politicians, especially Democrats, will say, we're with you, we need to reform the system, it's all great. But then when you look at their cities that they run, they spend about 50% of their entire general purpose revenue just on policing.
Right.
And we're not even talking about all of the other stuff. And so where does a lot of that money come from? Comes from the federal government. And most of it came under Clinton in the '94 crime bill. So we are asking for folks to take a look at this crime bill and to repeal it. $30 billion spent over 5 years to build prisons, to militarize the police, to put metal detectors in schools and fund the school-to-prison pipeline. So I want to ask you a question about how do we actually get at the heart of the problem, which is the insane amount of money and resources that we spend criminalizing black and brown communities. And for everybody who talked about a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, housing for all, food for all of the things our communities really need to truly thrive and be free, we could pay for all of it if we stopped criminalizing our communities and started investing in them instead. So can we talk about money, and especially how we hold Democrats accountable for saying they care for our communities and then spend 50% of our budgets on police?
Thank you, Sister Jennifer. Who wants to take that? Mayor, you want to take that?
Just quickly,
Okay.
You're absolutely right. I mean, Urban Shield, which provides military equipment to all cities and their police department. It's ridiculous. You don't need that kind of equipment in cities, and yet still a lot have bought into it. You're right, 6% of most tax dollars, whenever else, go to police department, et cetera, and whatever else. When if we created a greater economy, more jobs, et cetera, had better schools and whatever else, that wouldn't have to happen. The average American has no clue or idea the amount of money that is spent in policing versus other services, which shows that military mentality. Like I say, history has never been recorded correctly in the United States. It's propaganda. I see the mayor of New York sitting there. I had to move to New York when I got run out of Rochester after doing a whole lot of things. I was lucky enough to work with Adam Clayton Powell and Malcolm X. Those are my two mentors. History does not know, and I bet you even the mayor, that we in Harlem were getting ready to run Malcolm X to replace Adam Clayton Powell in the Congress, and they were very close friends. Those kinds of basic things aren't even known in this and that. So let us work together and unfoil, because during the Civil Rights Movement, we had regular jobs, then we sat up all night, planning and this and that, so we didn't have time to write. Plus, we weren't that well educated, et cetera, whatever else, though, I have been lucky enough to teach at several universities, whatever, just because I had practiced.
MIT,
yeah, I was the Martin Luther King Fellow for 2 years.
That's right.
But what she's saying is correctly. So, but I say this to you, let's not look at that above or outside of climate warming and everything else. To accomplish what has to happen, we've got to be responsible to the environment, to the state of people, education, everything else. It takes the total integration of these things to create a democratic society.
Thank you for that, Mayor. We have time for just two more questions. I mean, this has been riveting. So we're going to go to our next question.
Hi, I'm Melissa, and I'm a troublemaker.
Okay, Melissa, I'm going to start. I'm not doing this just because of you. I'm trying to get everybody in. Sure. I know you're going to do this, though. You're going to just ask us a question.
Sure. So
okay.
The question is, when you see Democratic mayors have their police force beat up and tear gas protesters, especially those protesting against police brutality, how does that impact people wanting to come out and vote? Because if your city is beating you up and harming you, what's the point of voting and getting involved?
Very good question, Melissa. Thank you so much. Sister Nixon, you want to take that?
You're saying when your own police force is bombing you and gassing you, right? I mean, what I think is the cusp that we're on right now, the two opposing forces, I think the way in which we use the criminal justice system as an extension of slavery and systemic racism, but also the amount of money that there is to be made out of incarcerating people, that's an enormous force. But the other force that we have, I think, is movements like the Black Lives Matter movement. And the Black Lives Matter movement came into being because it had to, because it was a matter of survival and life and death, but it also was greatly empowered by the technology at our disposal, by the fact of the matter that, we all have phones now, and in interactions with the police and interactions on the street, we can film these things. And so it's starting to break into the national consciousness. But what we need to do is we need to be sure that the reality that's being brought to us it begins to make its way into public policy. Yes. And it's some of the issues that we've spoken about here. And we have to, as are being done in places like Ferguson, which are so much ground zero, right. to go out into communities and say, you must vote because there can be no police accountability and there can be no transformation of the criminal justice system until we hold those in power accountable, and if they're not going to change until we vote them out.
There it is. Wow. So I want to say, my apologies. This panel was so fiery, David. We could have had 2 hours. Next time we're going to have 2 hours. But we are running behind just totally, and we have another panel coming up. I want to thank our esteemed panelists. I want to say that we really are the answer to our problems, and as Sister Nixon really hit the nail on the head, and I think where Sister Melissa was getting that we got to hold the people who we elect to office accountable.
That's right.
And
that's right.
If they can't do it, then we vote them out.
All right.
And don't fear voting them out. And it doesn't
Then
matter
we
if they have
vote you
a
in.
D or an R behind their name. It really is about the people who are going to stand for the people. And I think that's where Sister Jennifer was getting at. So our 3 takeaways that we must protest because we need people in the streets to be the symbol of what is wrong.
That's right.
We must plan. We need some folks in the back room planning. That is planning to get people elected to office who will stand up for the people, won't equivocate, and will answer to the people. And then we must persevere because this is a long distance journey.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
protest, plan, and persevere. That is really what we're going to do.
Right on.
Yeah?
Love it.
So,
Love it.
big thanks to Brother Danny Glover, Mayor Newport, Sister Nixon, Dr. Cornell West, baby. And Nina Turner. We are sisters and brothers. Yeah. Hello, guys. Hello, this was a great panel. If I get to say so myself, this panel was good. All right, we are moving straight to the international roundtable. I want to bring to you David McWilliams to the stage. Thank you again to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you.